5 Live Formula One.
It's been 6 days since Max Verstappen won his 4th consecutive F1 World Championship. Rumour has it he was still celebrating in the bar at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. Unfortunately, though, Max will have to put the champagne back on ice for another couple of weeks because things move very quickly in this sport, and F1 is already back on track, this time at the Losail International Circuit in Qatar. I'm Rosanna Tennant, and joining me to look ahead to what could still be an interesting weekend here in the desert, even though the driver's title has been decided, is our lead commentator Harry Benjamin, the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson, and former McLaren F1 mechanic Mark Priestley. Guys, how are we doing? These races come thick and fast at this point of the season. A triple header just to end a very, very long season off, Harry. How are we all doing?
The longest ever in Formula One history. You know what? It feels like only yesterday we were getting ready for Bahrain. It's gone by so quickly. And I am looking forward to the end of the season. I think we've been treated to an absolute cracker in the end, if you take out the first couple of races. So I'm feeling good, and there's still storylines to be settled, even right to the bitter end.
Still life in the old dog yet. Andrew, seamless segue. 2 more races to go and still quite a lot to be settled, as Harry said. Constructors' Championship still in the balance. Plenty of headlines for you to be writing about, and that's been the case all season long, hasn't it, really?
It has. There's been story after story, and they've all followed a bit of a theme. There's been another story about controversy and chaos at the FIA, the governing body, this week. The Constructors' Championship to settle still in the last 2 races between 2 of the biggest names in Formula One, McLaren and Ferrari. And personally, despite all that, Rosanna, I have to admit I'm feeling a little bit frayed around the edges after all these time zone changes at the end of the year, but we'll muddle through.
Has this been your busiest year?
It's right up there, Harry, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, it really has been pretty frenetic and full on. But there have been so many great storylines, Mark. And you've worked in the sport, of course, you've worked on the cars. You know how the mechanics are going to be feeling at this point. 1 race down in this final triple header. Goodness me, are the mechanics wishing the Christmas holidays to come as quickly as they possibly can?
Well, I think, yeah, lots of them will be. It's been an exhausting season, I think, for everybody involved, because it's, as Harry said, it's the longest season in Formula One history, 24 races. But not only that, they've been grouped in these kind of triple headers. And as you said, we're in the middle of one now to round off what's been this very long season. Not only is it triple header, but it's gone from Vegas last week to Qatar this week and then on to Abu Dhabi just 7 days later. So it's a crazy schedule. So the Christmas break cannot come soon enough for a lot of people.
Just 7,000, 8,000 kilometres travelled. The F1 circus packed down on Sunday last weekend, and suddenly it's popped up again here in the desert in Qatar. And it's a sprint weekend. So we've actually already had our one and only practice session and sprint qualifying today. Lando Norris was fastest in the McLaren. We're going to touch more on that very shortly. But first, Harry, we have to reflect on the Las Vegas Grand Prix. What a weekend. The championship winning weekend for Max Verstappen. And after such a difficult year for him, do you think perhaps his overriding emotion last weekend was almost relief in a way that he'd finally done it?
Yeah, I think so. I said it at the time. I think it's his best championship so far. And I almost think you're spot on with what you say there, because normally when Max Verstappen is racing, whether it be for 5th place, which isn't very often, or whether it be for the race win and the podium, he is all guns blazing. He will get his elbows out all the time. Whereas in Vegas, there were times where he did not fight the car that was coming through because his mission was clear, just to seal the title, get it done in Vegas, and then relax until the end of the season. But I also think it is this kind of how you come back from the adversity of this year, from the controversy of this year, from being painted as the villain once again, that has made this the championship that he will remember probably the most out of the ones he has so far. He's 2 different people inside and outside of that cockpit. And that was none clearer than this season. And I have full respect to how he's handled everything, both off the track and how it hasn't affected his racing on the track. No matter where Max Verstappen starts in a Grand Prix, you can never rule him out of winning the race.
I don't think he ever felt any real jeopardy in terms of the championship, Rosanna. He built such a big lead in the first 5 races. He won 4 out of the first 5 races. And then he carried on winning after that, even when McLaren had got to a point where they were pretty much as quick as Red Bull. And what's happened, even when McLaren got to a point where they were probably quicker on balance, he's been driving at such a high level that even when other people were winning, he was still the person who was constantly on the podium. So he never really lost that many points each race weekend, even if he was losing the odd one here or there. But that speaks to the incredibly high level of consistency that he's been putting in all his performances this year. And I agree with Harry, that's why this championship has been his best. He's only won 1 race since Spain back in June, and that race was one of the greatest victories in Formula One history in the wet in Brazil. He doesn't look like he's going to win another race in Qatar this weekend, and may well not win in Abu Dhabi either. And to even with that advantage that he built up at the beginning of the year, to keep that level and also to keep the calmness in him when everything that was going on around him, the controversy over his team principal and the sexual harassment allegations that Christian Horner was subject to at the beginning of the year, which he denied and which internal investigations have cleared him of, rows between his team boss and his father over that situation, then the decline in performance of the car. Through it all, Max Verstappen has been the calm eye in the storm. It's been an absolutely superb season from him.
It has been an incredible season. And Andrew, it's sort of Rudyard Kipling territory, isn't it? If you can keep your head while all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. Not necessarily exactly accurate there, but Max Verstappen has been so calm, managing the relationship between his father, Jos Verstappen, and his team principal, Christian Horner, really making sure that the team sort of knuckle down and focus on the job at hand. And the job at hand, Mark, this year has been really difficult. That car was not the best car on the grid. And yet, Verstappen rises to the top. It has been sublime, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really has. I mean, I echo the thoughts of the other 2 guys here, but I think the other side of this is that on track in those races, like you say, he hasn't had the quickest car, which is something that a lot of people have thrown at him in previous championships. He's had a very dominant car. Not that that's a criticism, that's a wonderful achievement by him and his team to create that, but this year, he didn't have that fastest car all the way through the season. And as a result of that, he came under massive pressure at different times. And that's something we haven't seen from Max Verstappen. We haven't had to see that in recent years. So a new side of him had to emerge. And we didn't know how that was going to play out. Was he going to throw his toys out the pram? Was he going to, be so desperate to get back to the front where he's used to being that he would make rash decisions and silly choices in a race? But he didn't do that. He did what Harry said. He played it calm. He played it sensible. It was a much more mature Max Verstappen than I think we've seen from the previous years in his career so far.
There are 5 or 6 races, I think, this season that you can really pinpoint as what clinched this title for Max Verstappen. And you talk about absorbing pressure, use Imola as one of them, with Lando Norris slowly catching. Only needed really a few more laps at the end of that race to really pile on the pressure around that track, although notoriously difficult to overtake. You go to the Spanish Grand Prix and the racecraft that Verstappen was able to yet again showcase. The British Grand Prix, a pure excellence in strategy between him and the team, and how much that synergy and relationship works so well. Even Zandvoort, when suddenly we really are starting to see McLaren coming to the fore, Max Verstappen still able to perform, as you say, in a car that wasn't the fastest, wasn't capable of delivering him the easy wins that perhaps we've become to expect of Max Verstappen. Andrew said it earlier, Sao Paulo, absolute masterclass, going from 17th in the rain and those tricky conditions when many weren't able to even keep it on the track. He rises to the top once again. I think if you go back early in the season, an honourable shout out to somewhere like Canada as well. Again, mixed conditions, strategy, racecraft, all coming together. Those are some highlights I would pick out from the season that really clinched this title.
I think it's the leadership as much as anything else. The leadership is shown in the team. I did an interview with him in Las Vegas last weekend, and he was talking about the situation between Horner and his dad, and he said he'd had to sit them down basically. And I sort of joked, well, like you were the adult in the room, and he said, well, I don't want to say that, but we all had to muddle through. We don't have to be best friends. And you've seen that in the car and in the team through the season, leading the team when they kind of lost their way technically in the middle of the season. Actually, this fastest car thing is an interesting interesting debate because on average it's still the fastest car in qualifying over the whole season, but that number is skewed by how much it was dominant in the first 5 races of the year. And when you take those first 5 races of the year out, the McLaren has been the fastest car on average. But it's the whole package. We have seen him challenged before, but he responded in a very different way. In 2021, his first championship, it was hammer and tongs with Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes all year. And he definitely drove right on the edge and over it quite a few times in that year. That only happened really once this year. When it got to Norris and Verstappen wheel to wheel in Austin in October, he kind of employed the same sort of tactics that he was using against Hamilton in 2021. And he got away with it that weekend. But then the following weekend in Mexico, similar situation. He did look like he lost his head a little bit in that Mexico race. But he still managed to maximise his result despite getting 2 10-second penalties in that. And that in itself said something, that he could still have 2 10-second penalties and still get a good haul of points. So we shouldn't underestimate how good Red Bull are as a team. The Red Bull's still a very good car, but overall this is Verstappen's championship and nobody else's really.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to pick up on that side of things, that his team has done an unbelievable job as well. And if you think about the battle for this world title, it's come down to Max versus Lando at the end, the only 2 guys that had a shout at doing it. And if you look back over the 2 seasons, of course, Max vastly experienced now and vastly experienced at leading at the front. Lando, who was just, hadn't even won a race until halfway through this season. But the same for the 2 teams. McLaren were figuring it out. They were learning to make these big decisions in races, whereas Red Bull, they had this confidence behind them that enabled them to make the right calls at the right times, and Max, together with the team, were able to execute pretty well, perfectly on more than most occasions over the course of the season. That's how you win championships, is getting those big decisions under massive pressure right, and both of them, the team and the driver, did that over and over again.
He has been faultless, hasn't he? Max Verstappen, then a 4-time world champion, joining the illustrious names of this sport and firmly writing his name in the history books as perhaps one of the greatest of all times. And I spoke with Max in yesterday's media session here in Qatar, and he's had a few days now to ruminate on what he's achieved. And he started by explaining how special this championship feels in comparison to his 3 previous ones.
I mean, they've all been very different, but I do think that this one was very rewarding at the end of the day. It's not always been the easiest for us as a team, and to come away with that championship, I really felt it when I crossed the line in Vegas. I was like, it's done. It's been challenging at times, but I'm very proud of how we handled everything.
There's been another high-profile sacking in the race direction and stewards area of the sport. Tim Mayer has now said that the president of the FIA, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, intervened with the swearing issue. How do you see that? How do you sort of react to the leadership that's going on at the moment at the FIA?
I think in general, it's not a good look at the sport, but I also, I'm not there to really judge the day-to-day management, right? Because I don't know what's going on. But I hope things will sort itself out soon for everyone.
From a very exciting subject, Max's triumph in winning the championship, to a much more serious issue, the FIA and the president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, and his role in running the FIA, presiding over the F1 sort of championship as a whole, because that, of course, is what the FIA is, the governing body. Andrew, the FIA have been making headlines for the last few weeks, and perhaps you would say probably even for longer than that. What's the latest? You alluded to it at the beginning of the show, but it feels a bit chaotic when it comes to the governing body at the moment.
It does indeed, and the drivers are saying the same, Rosanna. It's only 2 weeks, lest we forget, since they sacked the race director and then the compliance officer. And now, before this race, they've sacked one of the leading stewards and the Formula 2, or the woman who was going to become the Formula 2 race director. And they've asked a new race director in Formula 1, who's only been there for 1 race, to do both Formula 1 and Formula 2. Now, Tim Mayer is the steward who was sacked. He's been in Formula 1 for 15 years. He's a very well-respected figure, and he spoke to BBC Sport this week about what had happened. He said he got fired by text message. He was incredulous at the idea of them removing this the woman, Jeanette Tan, who was going to be F2 race director, describing her as the epitome of the type of person we want working for the FIA. he said that it was Ben Sulayem, as you said in your interview with Max Verstappen there, who was behind this campaign to punish the drivers for swearing. And he basically said that he got fired himself because the president had taken personal offence at something that was in a appeal document that the Circuit of the Americas, the US Grand Prix track, had lodged last month when they were fined for a track invasion. It's not, as Verstappen said, it's really not a good look, and there's been a series of controversies. I mean, if we think back through the year, the FIA has lost a sporting director, a technical director, the chief executive officer, the head of the Commission for Women, the secretary general for mobility, and the director of communications, as well as the four people that I've just mentioned.
Anyone still left?
Well, quite. And George Russell, who's one of the two directors of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, he was saying, when are they going to tell us who's going to be sacked next? And there was another story in the Times this morning about some less than savoury issues as well. So I can tell you, I know a lot of stuff that's been going on behind the scenes that I've not been able to report on yet, which I'm going to try to do in the future. There's more of this stuff to come, and you do have to wonder where it's going to end.
Well, George Russell, as you say, heavily involved with the GPDA. That's sort of the union for the drivers. And he has said they just want transparency and consistency. And he said, we are not getting transparency and consistency. So, as Andrew says, more to come on that story. So keep an eye on the BBC Sport website. And of course, as we find out more when we're on air, we will tell you all about it. We've spoken about Max Verstappen and his fourth world title, but of course it was Lando Norris who put the most pressure on him this year. It almost looked like at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix that things could actually be swinging in Lando Norris's favour and McLaren's favour. But of course it was Max Verstappen who reigned victorious. I spoke with Lando about whether he feels he now has the ingredients to win a championship, given the fight he's had to put up to contend with Max Verstappen.
I think so. Maybe I don't sound it or look it at times, but I'm confident with what I have and what I'm capable of doing. Did I maybe show that at every point this year? Probably not. But in those times, I think I've learned a lot. And even those times have been within the last month and 2 months, especially. So I've probably not shown it this year, which I can confirm and I can admit. But I definitely think I have what it takes to challenge next year. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, and I think there's still going to be things I struggle with and maybe not perfect with going into next year, but a lot more prepared than I was this year. So as long as I've made progress and I'm probably with a few things that I say I'm confident that I can challenge next year, then I'm happy with the job that I've done.
You said that the car has so many weaknesses. How concerned are you that those weaknesses might crop up this weekend and next weekend? And what does that then mean for the Constructors' Championship?
I think, and I hope we return a little bit more back to normal this weekend. But it's a lot colder, and a lot colder usually means certain things. One of those things is graining the tyres that we struggled with a lot last weekend. I'm hoping just the characteristics of the circuit play more into our favour than some of those weaknesses, but I think the weaknesses or those things will probably play more into other teams like Mercedes. Mercedes were very strong last weekend because of certain things. Those certain things I think will play again this weekend. So I think they'll be very strong, but I certainly don't think we'll struggle as much as we did last weekend out.
He's learnt a lot this year. But is there a fear that McLaren won't be able to give him a championship-winning car in terms of the driver's title next year? And there are going to be so many people going for that coveted position, guys, isn't there?
Well, I suppose theoretically they should be able to come straight out of the blocks next season, unlike this year. If they win the Constructors' Championship, which is a very possible thing even to do this weekend, they're the best team. As Andrew said, if we take the first 5 races out of this season, they have been overall the quickest car in qualifying trim. So they should be able to deliver the car that will see Lando Norris fight for the title. But as you allude to, the only problem is where this season it's really been more of a 2-horse race towards the end, we're going to get more convergence. We're going to get the Ferraris in there. What about the Mercedes as well? They finally going to find a more consistent way forward. Oscar Piastri needs to improve his consistency, but let's remember, he's only finishing his second season in Formula One. He will be a challenge next year, and Max Verstappen will absolutely be back for another bite of the cherry. So there will be more contenders, which is what will diminish the chance for Lando Norris. Has this been Lando Norris's one and only chance to get a title? Absolutely not. Has this been maybe will this be one of the more opportune years where he could have had the chance? Possibly.
I think there's every reason to believe, Rosanna, that McLaren will start next year as the favourite. Their development trajectory over the last 18 months or so has been the best in Formula One, pretty much. Let's not forget how far they've come. At the beginning of 2023, they were pretty much the slowest car. Then they brought the famous Austria upgrade in the middle of 2023 season, and that vaulted them right up into the sort of leading pack. Okay, Red Bull were dominating all the way through last year. Started this season a bit slowly, but this Miami upgrade that we referenced a little bit earlier brought them right up onto the pace, and they've been there ever since. They've got great confidence in their upgrades and their development and how they improve the car, and with good reason. Andrea Stella, the team principal there, has done an incredible job since he took over a couple of years ago. So I don't see any reason why they should lose that development potential. The rules are the same next year. It's the last year of this current rule set. I think they're the team to beat, or at least that's what you would expect going into next year. Of course, Red Bull are very strong, but what's going to be the effect of losing Adrian Newey from their design team? He's moving to Aston Martin. Ferrari have come on strong this year too. They're battling their McLaren's rival for the Constructors' Championship in these last two races, 25 points behind at the moment as we head into Qatar this weekend. And Mercedes, they look a bit up and down, but maybe they'll lock in to the secrets of these ground effect cars. But McLaren start favourite, I think, and Lando Norris, he's had a really strong season. People have criticised him. He's made the odd small mistake here or there, yes, but they're only really small, and they're pretty obvious what they are. And actually, when you analyse down into them, they're not really as bad as a lot of people have suggested. He's very, very fast. People talk about Piastri, but Norris has out-qualified him lots to not very many. He's been much quicker than him. I don't have the exact stats. It's about 0.15 of a second on average over the season, I believe. So I think he's going to be a really strong contender next year.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think McLaren will come out the blocks as favourites for next year. And not just because they're finishing this year strongly with a good technical car, but because they've got two good drivers who have learnt a huge amount this year, but also the team themselves have learnt so much. As I touched on earlier on, there's small mistakes that Andrew's referencing, and he's right, they're small mistakes, both from driver and some from team. They're exactly the typical kind of mistakes that a team who's learning how to win again makes. And, I've been looking recently back at some of these big periods of domination, and actually it's not even just from Formula One. I mean, look at any team in most sports, whether it's football or Formula One, when they go into a long run of years of domination, the year before that run started is a year that looks exactly like the one that McLaren have had this year, where they're very quick on occasions, very successful, they make some mistakes, they learn from them, and they get it right next time. It's about figuring out how to put the pieces together to put together a really strong championship fight. They've got all the foundation blocks in place at McLaren, deep into the organisation. Everything seems to be now running very, very smoothly, and as a result of that, the car's working well, the pit wall's working well, the driver's now working well. Everyone's confident next year should be a really strong year for McLaren.
How big a deal is it for McLaren or Ferrari? The gap, of course, 24 points between them at this point in the season. How big is it for each of these teams to win the Constructors' Championship? And perhaps just taking a step back, how big is it to win a Constructors' Championship, Mark?
It's huge. It's huge on a number of different levels, right? I know from a fan's perspective, it's all centred around the driver title, and Max has done that one. But from inside the team's perspective, there's two major sides to this. One is winning the Constructors' Championship comes with a huge amount of financial reward. There are tens of millions of pounds, many tens of millions of pounds that are associated with winning that. That's worth having, clearly. There is a negative impact to that in that winning the Constructors' Championship, you have a number of restrictions placed on you from a technical point of view of how you can then develop the car in the wind tunnel and in their CFD, the computational fluid dynamics systems that they use so heavily to develop in the following year. So that's a penalty designed to level out the playing field. But from a personal point of view, inside the team, the many hundreds, sometimes thousands of people that work inside that organisation, it means a lot. And it will mean a huge amount to either of the two teams in contention because neither of them have won it for a very, very long time. It was 1998 when McLaren last won a Constructors' Championship, and 2008, I think I'm right in saying, when Ferrari last won it. So that's a huge amount of time when no one's won this thing before.
Yes, I mean, that's the thing. The Constructors' Championship, it normally doesn't mean that much in terms of in the battle with the Drivers' Championship. Everyone looks at that. This year, I think it is a big story because of that big gap that Mark's talking about. McLaren, particularly, if they can pull it off. Okay, actually, they really won the Constructors' Championship in 2007. That was the Spygate year. Mark was a mechanic that year at the
I'm still
team.
bitter.
And he'd missed his bonus as a result because the team were disqualified.
Actually, I still got the bonus.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah.
How much was it?
I can't reveal that.
They got disqualified from the Constructors' Championship for all the controversy that happened there. It was about spying on Ferrari's technical information, and they were found guilty of that by the FIA. But so it's going to be since 1998 that they've won the championship. In that period, again, it's not just about the progress McLaren have made in the last 18 months that I was referencing earlier. If we cast our mind back to the middle of the last decade, McLaren were really struggling. They were competitive in 2012, and then they went on this slide down. They had the Honda engine, went right back to the back of the field. They were so poor they basically drove Fernando Alonso out of Formula One. He was driving for them at the time because he was so fed up with being at the back. And since then, Zach Brown was made chief executive officer. They've been through a couple of team principals since then, until Brown settled on Andrea Stella that I was talking about earlier. And it's been slightly bumpy, but it's been an upward trajectory ever since Brown took control back in 2017. And the Constructors' Championship this year, if they win it, would be the sort of endorsement of all the changes that have been made at the team, all the investments that they've made behind the scenes, all the changes that they've made to their structure, this investment in two young drivers in Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. And they really deserve it. And the same in a way goes for Ferrari. They've been through difficult years. They've missed out a couple of times with Alonso again when he was driving for them in 2010 and 2012. They went through a big downward spiral as well. They've thrown away a couple of championships, and now they're back at the front again.
F1. Red flags to slow down. What?
The checker flag is waiting.
I can see our Chequered Flag podcast being quite spicy. 5 Lives Chequered Flag podcast.
Oh, right, let's get back then to the Constructors' Championship. We've been discussing the likelihood of McLaren or Ferrari winning it, both teams having come on this incredible journey over the last few years. Harry, just remind us, who needs to do what to take the crown this year?
This weekend, the Constructors' crown can be clinched by McLaren if they finish first and second in the sprint race, and they finish first and second in the Grand Prix, with one of their cars getting the extra point for fastest lap as well. So they need 1-2 sprint, 1-2 Grand Prix plus fastest lap. Essentially, if they leave Qatar with 45 points a gap to Ferrari, or a 44-point gap if they win the Grand Prix, because then on countback, McLaren would have more wins. But that's the more complicated way of thinking about it. 1-2 sprint, 1-2 Grand Prix plus fastest lap is what we're looking for McLaren to seal it this weekend.
They need a clean sweep. They need their drivers performing at the very best of their ability, don't they? Both teams need that. And off the back of Vegas, there was a little bit of squabbling going on between Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz for the Ferrari team. I think they've alluded to it being a sort of reset, the reset that they needed. I mean, kind of timely then, if they've got 2 races left to try and win the Constructors' title. Have they got it together, do you think, Ferrari? Is there a little bit of animosity, or is everything okay now in their camp, Andrew?
Well, there's been a bit of a pattern this year it's developed because Carlos Sainz is leaving. He basically lost his drive before this season even started because Lewis Hamilton's been signed by Ferrari for 2025. As a result, he's been a bit more willing to fight his corner than he might have been, a bit more willing to ignore team orders. And that's basically what happened in Las Vegas. He was told to stay behind Charles Leclerc, and he didn't. And that really annoyed Leclerc because there's been a number of occasions this year where Leclerc has sort of obeyed orders to stay behind Sainz. We think back to Mexico a couple of races ago, and other times when maybe not orders were invoked, maybe they were, but Sainz has decided to race Leclerc when he's been behind, and he takes a different attitude in those situations. And you can't blame him in his situation. He's going to Williams next year. Who knows when he's going to have a front-running car again, whereas Leclerc is staying at Ferrari. So there is a bit of tension there, even if, once it's all forgotten and they're out of the car and the adrenaline's gone down again, they're kind of matey. all the sort of social media videos go on, you know, they're trying to present this sort of like the two Charleses image, you know, all friends together.
Happy families.
Yeah, happy families, exactly. Obviously, there's some competitive tension, but I think at the end of the day, they both want Ferrari to win the constructors, Sainz and Leclerc. So I'm sure they'll be able to bury the hatchet just for 2 more races.
And actually, in that constructors' battle, you know, last week in Las Vegas, it was a real opportunity for Ferrari. And in many regards, you know, they kind of took it. They had an opportunity where their car really came alive around that racetrack. And at the same time, McLaren's really didn't. So this was an opportunity where Ferrari could have really closed the points gap down, maximised their own performance at a time when McLaren was struggling to keep any pace with them. And what ended up happening was, whilst Ferrari had a pretty decent weekend, they came 3rd and 4th on the racetrack, it was Mercedes that kind of got in the way and had this unbelievable weekend out of the blue where they dominated. So that took some points away. But on the flip side, McLaren also managed to rescue a real good haul of points just behind Ferrari in that race. So the opening up, the closing of that gap from Ferrari to McLaren probably wasn't quite as dramatic as Ferrari would have hoped it to have been. So that still leaves, going into this weekend and with 1 more to go in just 7 days' time, that still leaves McLaren with a real advantage, and particularly on a racetrack today where we've seen in Qatar, McLaren have got a strong car.
Well, when Charles Leclerc was asked about the squabble in Vegas, he sort of made out that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. But Carlos Sainz was a little bit more chatty. Here's what he had to say about the issue when I spoke to him ahead of the Grand Prix weekend to find out if things had been resolved.
We've definitely talked about it and come to conclusions by talking about things, and we're definitely ready to move on from that race weekend. That definitely wasn't a very good race day for both of us, and now we are just looking forward, you know, to win the championship, fight for this constructors title the best way we can, and by working together like we've been working together for 4 years and trying to put together the best possible end to the season.
Given how close the championship is between yourselves and McLaren, has this track come at a pretty difficult time for you in terms of closing that gap?
Yeah, definitely not our best track, and on paper. At the same time, F1 always surprises you. So in theory, it's not a good track, but races are there to be raced, and we might come out of this weekend still with a positive scenario. So time to obviously be wary and try to put together the possible weekend, getting ready maybe to do some damage limitation. But at the same time, after Sunday, might completely be a different story.
Carlos Sainz sounding a little bit sniffly, and I actually asked him after the interview if he was okay, and he said he had a bit of a cold. Nico Hülkenberg also had a cold. The drivers are feeling it a bit, this triple header, but Ferrari are going to be trying everything, aren't they, Harry, to get on top of this and make sure they put themselves in the best possible position to take the Constructors' Championship.
Yeah, I think Vegas was a bit of a they made a bit of a mountain out of a molehill for that one. I mean, there were so many things outside of the overtaking of Leclerc. Leclerc got ahead at the start, chewed up his tyres, and that allowed Sainz through. But equally, the bizarre cancellation of the pit stop last minute for Carlos Sainz when he was desperate to come in early. Did that make him fall back a bit? And when Leclerc came out of the pits, he was on cold tyres anyway, so it was an easy move for Sainz. It wasn't like he was really working hard for that. So in terms of the team relationship going forward to try and seal that Constructors' Championship, I think that is fine. And I think that is generally what Sainz wants to do, but he wants to finish ahead of Leclerc at every race he can now to the end of the year. That's obviously, it's only 3, including the sprint. There's pride at stake for Carlos Sainz. I think he'll take a lot of pride if he is able to finish ahead of Leclerc towards the end of the season, at least in the races. And if that can seal the Ferrari Constructors title as well, then I think that's a bit of a mic drop moment for Carlos Sainz, and he leaves with his head held very high and the door still ajar for if the move with Lewis Hamilton doesn't pan out, or if there's another shock move further up the grid.
Mic drop. Can't wait to see that. Carlos Sainz mic dropping out of the Ferrari garage. I'm sure that would go down well. They say in Formula One, you're only as good as your last race. Well, the last race for Mercedes was exemplary. 1-2 finish. George Russell leading Lewis Hamilton home, and Hamilton having to put in an incredible recovery drive to make his way up from P10 on the grid to the second spot. But, I mean, what do we say about their performance at the moment? Can we assess where they are?
I'm not even sure Mercedes could assess where they are. They've sometimes struggled to figure out why they've had such good results at times. That's been the nature of this season for them. It's been up and down, and they still, I think that they've got on top of a lot of their early problems, and some of the recent results have shown that. But they still haven't got this full understanding of why it's not consistently good. And that's been one of its inherent characteristics, that it's inconsistent. And the drivers, you can't deal with an inconsistent car. It works at some very specific racetracks. Las Vegas was very, very cold, racing deep into the night. Although it's out in the desert and it's generally warm in the day, at night time it's very cold. And the Mercedes tends to work well there because it struggles in terms of managing tyre temperature. In a hot climate, their tyres overheat. But on a cold day, in a cold climate, they tend to warm their tyres up very quickly, get them into the right operating window, and then the car comes alive, the grip comes, and they get the performance. And actually, moving here to Qatar, we've actually seen something similar in that the temperatures are a lot colder than they were last year, and that has just favoured that Mercedes a little bit more than we thought it might. So although this was never likely to be a racetrack that suited them too much, it is a very smooth track that suits them. They can run the car very low to the ground, which brings their aerodynamic performance into play. But the temperatures have really come in to favour the team. So, yeah, they're still a little bit puzzled in the big picture of where their car sits in terms of the grand scheme. Is it a good car or not? On some days it is, on some days it isn't.
And it's really played to George Russell's side of the garage this weekend. P2 for him in sprint qualifying a little earlier on, whereas his teammate Lewis Hamilton was down in P7. Let's hear how Lewis Hamilton was feeling after that qualifying session. Dejected, disappointed. Those are the words that come to my mind. Have a listen to this.
I'm just slow and same every weekend. So, car felt relatively decent. No issues and not really much more to say.
Looking ahead to tomorrow then, do you feel from the longer run paces that you would have done in practice that there is more that you'll be able to extract? Is this a qualifying thing, or is this a thing that you're also expecting to roll over into tomorrow?
The long run didn't feel too bad, but when you're always back where I am, it makes it very hard to be competing for, almost impossible pretty much to be competing for wins from there. So, but that's the sprint. I'll do what I can tomorrow.
We get to reset for the qualifying and for the main Grand Prix. Mm-hmm. Do you think there is some positives that you're able to take? Is there more?
Not particularly,
potential?
no. I mean, the positive is that the car is fast.
Yeah.
George should be able to shoot for a pole tomorrow.
But we know this isn't a you thing.
Sorry?
We know this can't be a you thing because you're saying the car is fast.
Who knows? Definitely not fast anymore.
So what do we make of Lewis Hamilton's comments after sprint qualifying then? Is it end of term blues? Is it just a frustration with himself? Because he said the car's fast. So what's going on?
I mean, talk about a roller coaster ride of a season for Lewis Hamilton. The highs are high, but the lows are low, and he can rise up as quickly as he falls. We often say it, don't we? We were chatting a little earlier as well, that more often than not, his emotions are always so linked to his on-track performances. But I said it last week in I think it was our review podcast after Las Vegas. I can't see Lewis Hamilton losing his skill as a racing driver. I think he's seeing red already. I think he's looking forward to next year, and I just think that will be the change he needs in his life and the way to move forward and start afresh. I think he's had such a long run and a good innings with Mercedes, but I think we are getting that, as you say, the end of term blues, but I think those end of term blues have kind of been going on for pretty much the full term.
He's an emotional character, and to give you an example, when I worked with Lewis way back at the start of his career, he was going out with Nicole Scherzinger. Do you remember that at the time?
Throwback.
Pussycat Dolls, yeah. And their relationship was always a bit up and down, right? But we could very clearly track the on-track performance to their relationship. Like when it was off, so was his performance in the car. And when he moved on to Mercedes, we used to joke with the guys at Mercedes when they'd say, look, there was more lap time almost in trying to keep those two together than there wasn't anything they could do with the car, because he was so linked to his emotions in terms of how it plays out in his performance. And that interview there, although it's quite a sad one to listen to, isn't it? I think that is his state of mind. And Andrew mentioned it earlier on. He rarely comes back in a weekend when it starts off being disappointing. And that's exactly how it started off here in Qatar. It's perhaps indicative of the end, coming to the end, like you say, of his Mercedes career. And let's all hope that the new, fresh challenge that comes with the move to Ferrari is the thing that reignites him and gets him back on track. And I hope, for his sake, and I think for Formula One's sake, that car suits his driving style, that he hits the ground running, and it really does bring him back to life, because that's what we need in this sport.
Yeah, it was ultimate dejection in that interview. The questions being asked by Ariana Bravo, and she made a good point. It's not a you thing, is it? He's a 7-time world champion, Andrew. It's almost unthinkable that Lewis Hamilton can't drag performance out of a car, especially when his teammate's able to do it. And obviously a younger, less experienced teammate in George Russell.
Well, his darkest demons he will be asking himself, is it me? Because he actually won't know right now. Basically, over the last 2 seasons, he and George Russell were pretty much neck and neck through qualifying. One of the years, Hamilton was marginally faster on average, and the other year, Russell was marginally faster on average. This year, Russell's wiped the floor with Hamilton in qualifying, at least as much as you could ever expect to do with Lewis Hamilton. He's something like 17.5 ahead of him on merit and at an average of 0.16 of a second. Those are big numbers when your teammate's a 7-time world champion. A lot of the time, things have just gone wrong for Hamilton at the end of qualifying when he's pushed a bit too hard, or he's pushed hard, I should say. He has an aggressive driving style. He's late on the brakes, a particular way of turning into the corner, which doesn't seem to go well with these ground effect cars, which need a bit more of a smoother approach. And you hear other drivers talking about this. Fernando Alonso has said, sometimes it's quicker to drive at sort of 95% because it keeps the car's aerodynamic platform nice and stable. You're not upsetting the airflow under the car, which is so important in creating the overall grip. What's weird, though, Rosanna, is why Hamilton hasn't been able to adapt to that. He's always been famous for his adaptability. And the other weirdness of it is that the big thing he's complained about this year is rear-end instability, whereas in the past, and, oversteer, basically, it's obviously not predictable oversteer. That's when the rear of the car wants to sort of go faster around the corner than the front, and you've got to correct it. He's always been famous for his ability to cope well with oversteer. So those two things, they're kind of paradoxical, and so he will be thinking, is it me, or is it the car, or is it something else? Is it a combination of circumstances? And it's one of the things that makes the matchup that he has with Charles Leclerc at Ferrari so fascinating for everybody in Formula One. Charles Leclerc is regarded as probably the fastest driver over one lap in the entire sport. So, and Hamilton knows that. So he'll be thinking, goodness me, Russell's beaten me like this at Mercedes. What's going to happen? He'll have the confidence internally that he'll be able to go there. But don't underestimate how much he's going to have to do going into his first season at Ferrari.
And don't forget, if that does go wrong in the very first days at Ferrari, if he is beaten, if he is outpaced, and he doesn't suddenly get this new turn of pace, what's that going to do to his mentality? Is that just going to confirm all these fears that are in there now?
Yeah, lots of questions, and it's a mouth-watering prospect, isn't it? Lewis Hamilton partnering Charles Leclerc next year, but he's a deep thinker. Let's hope he doesn't get too tangled up in those thoughts this weekend so he can unravel it and find the performance both in the sprint and the Grand Prix. So sprint qualifying, it was Lando Norris who took the sprint pole ahead of George Russell and then the second McLaren of Oscar Piastri. Those three ahead of the two Ferraris. Critically, Carlos Sainz ahead of his teammate Charles Leclerc, 4th and 5th respectively. How do we see the sprint playing out? And if we see a certain order in the sprint, is it going to be sort of rinse repeat for the Grand Prix, do you think, Harry?
Well, more often than not on the sprint races, well, we get the first 20% of the race given to us a day before. But I think if we can base this off anything that we saw last year, I mean, the temperatures are drastically different, but McLaren, obviously Oscar Piastri had a spectacular sprint win here last year, so I think Lando Norris will be in prime position to convert that. But you know what? I think George Russell in the Mercedes is really proving a spanner in the works for the McLarens right now. He splits them one in the middle, Piastri just behind. So I genuinely think George Russell might be in the running for the sprint race tomorrow, and equally for the Grand Prix as well.
So the sprint race, obviously, you're thinking George Russell is going to be right up there, point to prove. So actually, in a way, Mercedes could have quite a bit of an influence in terms of how the Constructors' Championship ends up with the Ferrari-McLaren battle this weekend.
Quite possibly. I think what will help Mercedes out this weekend is that the temperatures are a little cooler. We're nowhere near as cool as what we experienced in Vegas, but they go better in cooler temperatures. Also, Qatar generally as a country is pretty flat. The track is pretty flat as well. It's smooth. It's not very bumpy, and that allows the Mercedes in their whatever narrow operating window they tend to work best in to be able to maximise that. And I think Russell at the moment riding high, as you say, Roseanne, off the back of that fantastic Vegas weekend for them. I think he will be a thorn in the side of the two McLarens. Russell was quick here last year as well, had a fantastic start in the Grand Prix, only to be turned in on by his teammate Lewis Hamilton going into turn one and the two Mercedes crashing out. Well, Russell was able to continue, not so much for Hamilton. Equally, it'd be interesting to see what the Ferraris can do as well, because they came out of the blocks. We only had one practice session, and the conditions change. FP1 starts a little bit in the daylight still. It's quite windy, and we were all not writing off Ferrari coming into this weekend. It felt like they were writing off themselves because they tend to not go well at tracks where we get high, medium speed corners, long duration corners that the Losail International Circuit is made up on. Sainz is ahead of Leclerc, 4th and 5th. I wonder how they might be able to move forward in the race, because they desperately need to score good points to keep this title alive going to Abu Dhabi.
It was an interesting one, wasn't it? You're right. Ferrari were playing down their chances this weekend, sort of saying, on paper, we're going to struggle. It's the high-speed corners. So, yes, that almost half a second advantage that Charles Leclerc had in FP1 got us all questioning the form book a little bit. And I think that's the overriding feeling at the moment in the paddock. The drivers just don't know, and they keep on saying you just never know what a weekend's going to bring. So actually, when I say, will the sprint be a direct copy and paste for the Grand Prix, I don't think you can count on anything at the moment.
Well, it's important to remember, Rosanna, that unlike last year, the teams can change their cars between the sprint race and the start of qualifying. So even if you have a bad sprint, if your car isn't the way you like it, you've got 4 hours to change the setup and make it different for qualifying. So you can change things around. And you saw that in Austin, the last sprint but one. Max Verstappen dominated the sprint race there, but he didn't dominate the Grand Prix. He did end up winning it, but it was a much closer race. So it could all change again. The other thing to bear in mind for the sprint is that, and I heard George Russell say this himself, he's got less to lose than Ferrari. Mercedes aren't fighting than McLaren. Mercedes aren't fighting for anything. They're locked in 4th place in the Constructors' Championship. He can afford to, really go for it against the McLarens, whereas Norris and Piastri are going to have to be a bit careful because they have to protect those points and make sure that Ferrari don't gain any more ground on them.
It's definitely a different approach, isn't it, when it comes to George Russell? We've got some support series here this weekend as well as the F1. We've got the F2 series, of course, the feeder series to F1, and F1 Academy, where Abby Pulling is on the verge of winning the title. A big moment for her in her career, isn't it, Harry, to have the chance to take the championship with one round still to go in Abu Dhabi next weekend. Yeah, massive weekend for Abby Pulling. Of course, we've had her in the booth with us commentating this year as well. She's had some big support, not only from Alpine, the team who are backing her, Esteban Ocon publicly coming out in support of her as well. She is really perking interest in the Formula One paddock. She's 95 points clear of second place in the championship, which is Mercedes protege Dorian Pat at the moment, and she was very highly rated coming into the F1 Academy season. Abby can clinch it this weekend. She only needs to score 18 points, so effectively she just needs to finish second, and the title is hers, and then she gets a fully funded seat in a championship called GB3, which is effectively sort of British Formula 3 next season. So it is a lot at stake for Abby, but so far she's had a blinder of a season. Yeah, it's going to be a big weekend for Abby Pulling, and I managed to sit down with her in the run-up to this weekend to find out how she's feeling ahead of it.
I'm excited, to be honest. Everyone keeps asking if I'm nervous, but I'm actually feeling really relaxed. I think I've put myself in a great position going into these last two races. Obviously, with Singapore going so well, getting almost the maximum points, it's mine to lose at this rate. It's got to go really wrong. But, I'm not getting ahead of myself. Still got to put the work in. But, yeah, feeling very relaxed.
F1 Academy were here just a few weeks ago in Qatar for some testing. How did it go, and what has it helped you with in terms of preparing for this weekend?
To be honest, the testing was actually quite tough. We started on the back foot. So the 3 days was really useful to get to grips with the track. We thought we knew everything about this car and the tyre. Turns out we were wrong. But it was about how you finished, and we overcome some adversity, me and the team, and worked really hard. And I can't thank Radio Motorsport enough. They're incredible. Me and my engineer worked so well together, and yeah, we ended up like a couple of thousandths off of the fastest time. We set some quick times throughout the test at the end. So, yeah, going into this weekend in a great position, but the conditions are all changed. It's cooler now. It's different times of day. We've got some sessions at 11 o'clock, at night, whereas our testing finished at 4 o'clock. So, a bit of adapting to do, but, that's what this sport is all about.
Your stats this year are very impressive. 7 wins, 7 poles, 4 clean sweeps and 3 podium finishes on top of that. You've made it look relatively easy, but how hard have you been working behind the scenes with your team?
Yeah, everyone keeps telling me that it's easy for me. I'm like, it's not. It's definitely not. Yeah, we put so much work in, me and the team. Like, before Singapore, I did 7 days, not straight, but 7 days pretty close in succession on the simulator, just making sure I knew exactly where I wanted to put my car when we turned up, especially with the limited testing we did have at Singapore. We needed to hit the ground running, and that just put us in a great position. It was less about what I needed to improve. It was more about where we can get the car in a better window, and I think that was really important to do that. And yeah, the work hasn't stopped. We've really kept pushing the mental work. I think that's overlooked a bit in sports. So, doing a lot of mental work throughout the whole year, but then also obviously a lot of technical work and physical work in the gym and technical work with the team. I've really enjoyed this year and how the dynamic that it's had, and the input that I've had with the team, and I really feel like I've helped understand the car and the tyre better, because it is a bit different to some of the other European series, so some of the regulations. So it's been really fun. That's the part of racing that I really enjoy, is the development side.
You've been almost a sort of team leader then in that respect.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially with my teammates, they're a little bit less experienced, so I've been setting data for them and helping them kind of get up to speed and learn the tracks. It is quite hard when no kind of disrespect to anyone, but it's nice to have a teammate pushing you, and that's where I envy some of the other teams where they've got a lot of them setting data that's quite comparable. It's hard to figure things out for yourself. I've got to go out and I've got to be the one that breaks 10 meters later, or tries a different line, and that's tough. But I think as well, that's what makes you a better driver. Understanding where the limits are, when you're over it, and just extracting the absolute most out of the car, all within everything you figured out for yourself.
Very, very rewarding, I guess, in that respect.
Yes, definitely.
We're sitting in the Alpine hospitality area in the F1 paddock. You've got Alpine Academy written on your T-shirt. How imperative is it to have a Formula One team behind you that supports you so much, and what have you learnt from them this year?
It's incredible. I mean, I can't thank Alpine enough for supporting me. Since I think it's been 2022 now, they've trusted me so much. It's a big brand to uphold, and you've got to do them justice. And yeah, I like to think that I've done that this year, got some good results for them, and made the team proud. And yeah, what they've done for me, especially on the physical side, we do a lot with human performance, and I'm the fittest I've ever been, and that's all thanks to them and some of the people behind the scenes with Dave Thompson and Connor, who comes out to my races. Shout out. but they really do help me a lot, and even just as simple as keeping hydrated on a race weekend. Like, I'm so ditzy. so ditzy. So even just someone to be like, Abby, drink your drink. It helps so much. But even like nutritionally, in the hospitality, getting food here, making sure I'm eating the right things, just one less thing for me to worry about.
And all those little things add up to create the performance out on track, don't they? So you've learned a lot this year. As you say, you've had some challenges, almost having to push yourself forward. What does that mean for next year?
Yeah, well, next year, I think people, like I say, people think this year's been easy, but there was a lot of weight going into this year, that I had to kind of try to ignore. I had no option. I have to win. I don't have an option to lose, because if I lose, that means I don't get the prize. The amazing prize F1 Academy is providing is a funded seat for the following year in GB3 with Rodin Motorsport. So it's a team that I know really well. I don't have an option to not win that, because if I don't, it's kind of the end of the road for myself. So, it's been a lot to manage this year in that regard. I knew that the pressure was on financially in that regard, but I think I've managed it well, and I've done everything I can to put myself in a great position to achieve that. And hopefully, next year you might see me in bigger, faster machinery, which will be, even getting to this point has been a dream, and to keep progressing would be incredible.
And you've done it all with a smile on your face, with such effervescence. It's always so lovely bumping into you in the F1 paddock and around the place. And of course, that has a direct impact on young girls, young men as well, getting into the sport. Do you feel a pressure of sort of performing in a certain way to inspire other people to come into the sport?
Yeah, I will add to that. I always say a happy Abby is a fast Abby. I think I always drive my best when I'm enjoying myself. And even so, sometimes in testing where I've got a bit frustrated, I'm like, you know what? Just cheer up, Abby. I need to enjoy it, and then I end up going quicker. So it's, I think a big thing is perspective and making sure you realise how lucky you are to be in the positions you're in, and comparison is the thief of joy at the end of the day. But yeah, as you say, there's a lot of people looking up to me and are inspired by me, and I definitely acknowledge that. I don't think it puts pressure on myself. I think if anything, pressure is normally a privilege. So I'm just so proud that I can be there to expose younger girls or even boys to motorsport and show them how much fun it is. Obviously I want to do everything with a smile on my face and like my dad did to me, show everyone the love that I have for the sport.
Well, it's been a privilege sitting down with you ahead of what could be an incredible weekend for you, Abby, and I hope it's a happy Abby this weekend in Qatar.
Hopefully, we'll see.
That was Abby Pulling talking to me ahead of what could be her championship-winning weekend in F1 Academy. Right, guys, let's talk about the Grand Prix then. I'd like your predictions for the race and for the sprint race, if you'd like to throw that one in there too.
I think George Russell will win the sprint race, but I think the McLarens will get 1-2 in the Grand Prix. Norris ahead of Piastri.
Yeah, I think good shout. I also think George Russell will be strong. Partly, particularly if it's cold again, I think looking after those tyres is a real key strength of the Mercedes. So I'm going to say George Russell for the win in the Grand Prix, McLaren second and third.
I'm going to say Norris to win the sprint and the Grand Prix, but McLaren won't do quite enough to clinch the Constructors' Championship this weekend.
What about you,
And
Rosanna?
I'm with you, Andrew. I'm with Andrew because to disagree with the oracle that is Benny would be a foolish thing to
Stop
do.
it, Rosanna.
Maybe it's my end of term blues kicking in. Harry, Mark, Andrew, thank you so much for helping me preview the Qatar Grand Prix weekend. Of course, a sprint weekend, the 6th and final one of the season. That is tomorrow, the sprint. But then the race is on 5 Sports Extra on Sunday from 4 o'clock. Our build-up will start from 3:45 though. That's it from us. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.